Over the past year, our pastor has been covering the faces of the four living creatures, or the four beasts of God's throne room that is mentioned in Revelation chapter 4 and verse 6, and how they are represented in the four Gospels. And we have seen that Matthew represents the face of the lion, as his audience was the Jewish peoples, and he wanted to show them that Jesus was a direct descendant from the tribe of Judah, and more importantly, a descendant of King David, which fulfills prophecy. We have seen that Mark's gospel represents the face of the ox, as he shows his audience that Jesus came as a servant and paid the ultimate price for all mankind. Luke represents the face of a man, and Luke was a Gentile, and he wrote his gospel to the educated Greeks and the Romans. He shows us Jesus' human side, and knowing his audience, he appeals to the Greeks. The Greeks are always looking for the perfect man. That's what they were always, their goal was to look for the perfect man, and Luke provides that for them. The Gospel of John, as we know, represents the face of the eagle, representing God. And John, he shows his audience that Jesus is God, which we will hear probably more about that today, so I don't want to talk more about that. Now, this has been a remarkably interesting series of sermons, and I know that we are looking forward to much more of that. God's Word is a jigsaw of mysteries and puzzles to sort out with the help of the Holy Spirit. Today I want to show you another aspect of God's cleverness and the four faces, as his throne room has been replicated here on earth by his people and under his direction. The title of this sermonette is Tribal Standards. Tribal Standards. Now, this occurred right after God had made the covenant at Mount Sinai with the Israelites, giving them the law there in the wilderness. In Exodus chapter 25, you don't have to turn there, I'm just going to summarize, but in Exodus chapter 25, God instructs them to build the Ark of the Testimony, the Ark of the Covenant, which represents God's heavenly throne, and may even be some sort of a replica, since he gave the instructions on how it is to be built. In Exodus chapter 26, God continues to instruct the Israelites to build the tabernacle, a temporary temple, and a representation of God's throne room. He further instructs them on how everything will be placed in the tabernacle, how to set up the altar, the wardrobe of the priest, and how to worship him properly. Now that all of that is built and ready, God is ready to start moving them towards the promised land. So he organizes the tribes in the book of Numbers, chapter 2. Now, in Numbers, if you want to turn there, you can, but in Numbers chapter 2, beginning in verse 1, it says, And the Eternal spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, Every one of the children of Israel shall camp by his own standard, besides the emblems of his father's house. They shall camp some distance from the tabernacle meeting. On the east side, toward the rising sun, those of the standard of the forces of Judah shall camp according to their armies. Now, I have a couple handouts that I got some volunteers that are going to give those to you right now. But reading from the United Church of God commentary about this, it says that God made very clear to Moses that every Israelite was personally responsible for pitching his camp with his tribe. There was a recognizable standard, akin to the national flags of more modern times that we have, that bore the emblems or the insignia of each tribe and marked the area of the encampment. A leader was chosen for each tribe, the same man who had been in charge of taking the tribe census. In the center of all the camps were the Levites, surrounded by the 12 other tribes. The 12 tribes were sorted into 4 main assemblies. First in the order of procession of this great body of people was Judah on the east side of the tabernacle, with Issachar and Zebulun. On the south side of the camp, Reuben was accompanied by Simeon and Gad. The tribe of Ephraim was on the west with the tribes of Manasseh and Benjamin. And Dan, the tribe of Dan, took the northernmost camp with Asher and Naphtali. Now, this is an interesting part of God's organization of the tribes. See, each tribe, as you can see with these handouts here, each tribe had its own standard or flag, with the tribe's color maybe corresponding to the stones that were in the high priest's breastplate that represented each of the tribe, and a symbol or an emblem based pretty much on Jacob's blessing that he gave to them. Now, they were divided into 4 groups and represented by a standard or a flag for each of the collective groups. Now, according to Keel and Delitzsch, is a commentary on the Old Testament. It says, neither the Mosaic Law nor the Old Testament generally gives any intimation as to the form or character of the standard. According to rabbinical tradition, however, the standard of Judah bore the figure of a lion, that of Reuben, the likeness of a man or a man's head, and that of Ephraim, the figure of an ox, and that of Dan, the figure of an eagle. So that the 4 living creatures were united in the cherubic forms described in Revelation there and also in Ezekiel. That represented these 4 standards. Now, Expositor's Bible Commentary says the same thing, and the United Church of God's commentary states that this is very highly probable as well. Now, I personally agree with this. Now, here's the other handout showing how that they were all laid out. But I personally agree with this because it makes sense to me that this representation of God's throne room on earth would include the 4 living creatures which surround the throne of God. Now, the 3 Levite tribes, they were surrounded, as you can see, they were surrounding the tabernacle, and maybe they represented the 24 elders. Now, when we think of a throne room, we envision a throne room with a backdrop or a wall that's behind the throne, with the audience in the front and on the sides, as we see that has been the tradition of mankind. But looking at the example in the Bible, it is clear that God's throne is in the center, and his subjects are all around him. You know, from a human perspective, if I had my throne set up like that, I'd be a little bit nervous. You know, I probably want 2, cherubs or, cherubs over my throne as well to protect my back, but that's humanly thinking, and God's not worried about that. He has no concerns for that. But I find it was very interesting that also, looking at the layout of how this would be, the tabernacle, way here in the back is where the Ark of the Covenant would actually be, and the entrance is over this way. So I think that it's interesting that the 3 tribes that are closest to the Ark of the Covenant are the tribes from Rachel and Jacob, Joseph's 2 sons and Benjamin. And also having the tribe of Judah at the entrance of the tabernacle is almost prophetic as well. Now looking through history is also very interesting how these tribes of Israel, even when separated from God in the Holy Land, continued to bear their flag symbols. Now Judah, the lion, carried over into the British Isles with the same symbols for its people. And I don't believe that there were any lions in England. Of course, some of the descendants of King David, as we know, ended up there in the rulership, as foretold by God that his reign would continue. And even though Ephraim was also there, the bull, or the ox, is a part of the British people's imagery as well. Now in America, we have the eagle as our national symbol. And it may have come about because the tribe of Dan is truly the one that discovered America when you really look at history. They're the ones that truly found it. But we do have the olive branches and the arrows of Manasseh in our national emblem as well. But if you notice on the handout, on this one handout here, you have the eagle here representing these three tribes, but Dan's individual flag has pictured a snake on it. And again, it comes from the prophetic blessings that Jacob gave to his sons in Genesis chapter 49, as with other sons and their identity and symbols as well. Now another flag of Dan, not pictured here, but it shows the horse and its rider, and sometimes there's a snake actually biting at the horse's feet. Yet another depicts an eagle with a snake in its talons. So why the eagle? That's what some skeptics say about this standard for tribe of Dan and Asher and Naphtali. In relation to the eagle being associated with the tribe of Dan, Dan means judge. Dan means judge in Genesis 30 and chapter 30 verse 6, and also chapter 49 and verse 16. The symbolism of the eagle is often connected with judgment and many other scriptures, mostly dealing with future prophetic events of judgment. A couple examples: Jeremiah chapter 49 verse 22 and Ezekiel chapter 17 verse 3. Speaking of Ezekiel, in chapter 1 and verse 10, he describes what seems to be a portable throne of God descending to earth with the creatures with the four faces that we have been learning about. Many have tried to draw what Ezekiel described, but none can truly capture what he saw. God also instructed Solomon's workers to make images of cherubs in the temple and carved cherub images on the walls and the doors, as you can see in 1 Kings chapter 6. So they must have known what a cherub really, truly looked like. I think this is something that is lost to us today. And this was not idolatry, and neither were the emblems of the flags of the tribes that they had. They were not worshipped. Also, there were 12 oxen where the sea rested upon, which was the water basin. And oxen and lion images were also part of the decorations and carvings of the crates that were also used in the temple. Again, all these things were to replicate the imagery of God's heavenly throne. Solomon's temple must have been a glorious sight to see. And of course, God's throne is even greater. When you read through the Bible next time, just focus on many of the little details that you may have overlooked before. There's a wealth of knowledge and information for us to enjoy. Don't get caught up with skipping over all the begots. This begot this son, and which begot this son. There's a lot of information in there that's very unique when you look at it. Or in Numbers here, where you're dealing with all these different details that may not appeal to you, but it actually may surprise you when you start looking at some of those things. I've been working on a sermon about Numbers, which you'll be hearing shortly. But I wanted to point out that this imagery of these four faces even goes back to the time when they were in the wilderness and the way it was set up to represent God's throne as a portable, moving throne room as they went along. So I think it's very interesting that these were the standards that they had